Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. Thanks for being here. We're very happy because it's our first rendezvous de la création of the year, and there will be a few, not that many, so enjoy it because it's a rare substance for us. First of all, let me ask, who is in the master creative industries in the room? Raise your hand. So you see the vast majority.
That means all of you had to be here. This is you being mandated to come. But we're very happy that you're here.
But you know, we brought you some bread so that you had an incentive to come. It's a symbol for sharing, a symbol for being together. But I won't start the discussion before it starts. I just wanted to give you a bit of context because many of you weren't here last year. The context of the school, the context of the masters in the school, and the context of the rendezvous de la création within the school. So the school, you know where you are. So most of you study communication and creative industries. You know you have peers studying finance, human resources. It's a very eclectic school, but also therefore interesting place to be. It's a school that is very exposed to the private sector, to entrepreneurship, to ideas, to different aspects of what will become your professional life later. And it's also a school where we have pedagogical forms that we try to be innovative. And the Rendezvous de la Création are one such thing. They were created, Florence, 2016? 17. So we're not yet at the 10th anniversary, but we hope Alexandre will still be there to celebrate because he's been a very faithful lieutenant of the event. It's something that counts for your studies. It's a place where we like to host creation embodied through various profiles. I say creation, I could have said creativity, but then Florence would have jumped on me and say, we have to be very, parsimonious about the way we use creation against creativity. And I think that's something that Alexandre may dwell on in mastering the evening. That's a place where we want you to interact with those who have been creating new enterprises, new initiatives, who have been creating art. We have had a number of illustres invités in the past. Benjamin Millepied was one. Thierry Marx, I think, in the same-ish area. Claude Lelouch in his time. So, we handpick them because we know they have something to bring. We know it's interesting for you from a pedagogical, I have my dean's hat, so I have to say there's a pedagogical function, but take this opportunity to listen, to feel the experience, to feel the personality. Alexandre Kouchner, whom I should have introduced because many of you haven't seen him in this context yet. As I said, he's been with us for many years, and thanks to him, this series has been very successful as events, but also successful as bringing out substance in a way that we remember, in a way that can be cumulative through years. I'll stop here. Apollonia is someone we've had lunch last week as in chose de hasard. So I'm glad to host her tonight here at the school. And I'll give the floor to Alexandre, who will give you a bit more details about her profile and her whereabouts. So enjoy the evening. Thank you very much.
Bonsoir. On va la refaire. Bonsoir. Bonsoir. Vous voyez, c'est mieux. Bienvenue au tout premier rendez-vous de la création et de l'impact de la saison. And this first rendezvous will be in English. Alors, first of all, because many of you are international students, and we want you to have access to our guests the same way some French pupils would. Our guests are here to share with you, how they create, how they become artists, how they innovate, invent, fail, explore, fail again, and then finally discover what it means for them to create and what they need around them to actually become creators. And it's only fair that all of you have the same access. That's the first reason. The second reason is that this masterclass is finally, I shouldn't say finally, it's pas très sympa pour les autres, mais tonight is about something very important. We know we've danced, we've filmed, we sang, okay. Tonight we're talking about a cornerstone of the French culture. Tonight we talk about bread, brioche. We talk about croissant, pain au chocolat, chouquette. We talk about la vie. This is a very important class. And in a way, you could look at this by saying that arguably, bakery in general is one of the most important cultural French exports. Try to have a very good baguette outside of France. You will surely discover sorrow, lack of taste, grayish bread, and finally, maybe some good baguette that will probably cost about 17 euros. So tonight we look at actually what it means to bake. And we're going to talk about something that is as cultural, as ancient, as political, and as social as societies are. So tonight's rendezvous de la création et de l'impact is a tasty treat, right? It's a dive into how you feed people, how you create new tastes. It's also about legacy and running a business. Because the very name of our guest tonight is actually a landmark of excellence. It's a worldwide recognized brand and actually a beacon of what bread should taste like. I'm telling you, this is important. Her craft is as precious and subtle as they come. Her personal story is as inspiring as it is humbling. So, ladies and gentlemen, merci d'accueillir comme il se doit Madame Apollonia Poilâne. Right, so as you've guessed, because we are sitting like punk rock stars, this is not a cours magistral, right? This is not something you can doze off into your computers and get somebody's notes at the end of the semester. We've all done that. I was a student there. Don't worry, I didn't know the name of the room either. So, this is a conversation. You have to get involved. It's your opportunity to ask every question that you have to Apollonia Poilâne, every recipe you want to know, every secret of the trade, every aspect of what it means for you to actually, encounter and discover and enjoy bread. Our guest is here for that. This is going to be in two sessions, right? I get to ask questions to our guest, and then after a while, once you're tired of hearing my voice, you jump into it. If it's after 5 minutes, I'm going to feel insulted, but it's fine. So if at any moment any of you has a question, just, either shout it or maybe raise your hand. Either or. Got it? Yes.
Do we have to ask in English, or we can, if we have specific questions, but only in French words?
Okay, let's say that. How many of you are international students in this room? Right, so if somebody really feels like you want to ask it in French, do so. I'll try and translate it. Also, Apollonia will help us because some of these words are extremely precise. I don't know how to say pain au levain in English. So I know you do, but at sometimes maybe you can sort of share with us what it means. That was a very quick question. Any of you has other questions before we dive in? Also, we're going to bribe you. If you stay till the end of the session, you get to taste some of this. If you leave before the end of the session, I'll eat your part, I guess. So I know all of you will be thrilled to stay till the end and actually ask every question you want to ask. I get to ask the first questions if you don't mind. We're going to talk a lot about legacy. This is actually the title of this session. It's about continuity. It's about how you are from one vein and yet able to express yourself. So you're a third generation baker.
Yep.
So in a way, your story starts in 1932, right? Tell us about the very beginning of this story.
That's correct. And I really thought that Botox would do a better job after 92 years, but that's just to make you laugh for a second. So indeed, my name is Apollonia Poilâne. I am a baker, and I am in charge of my family's business, Poilâne, which has been a bakery in Paris, right around the corner on number 8 Rue du Cherche-Midi. And it started in 1932 when my grandfather, Pierre Poilâne, decided that he was going to make these big sourdough loaves, which he would have known in the countrysides of France, specifically in Normandy. And he decided that he was going to single-handedly counteract the baguette that was very much a staple at that time. So he starts then, and there's in this neighborhood a lot of artists, craftsmen, and little by little he develops a network of copains, really, with whom he shares this bread and builds his fellowship in this bakery. He starts getting a few customers' accounts that are restaurants, that are retailers, and he grows this. My father takes over in the 1970s, and he structures the business, creates a manufacture, and I'm going to let you hanging on that word for a second. We'll get back to it later. And with this, my father, Lionel, manages to structure a business, and that is the business that I take over in 2002, when my parents unfortunately pass away in an accident.
I want to go back to this,
Yep.
because this is the signature Poilâne bread. You just said, in
Broad terms.
just in rather broad terms, that this is not a baguette and it doesn't look like a baguette. But this is actually a game changer, right? This is different from everything that was sort of sold throughout Paris at that time. How is that different? Because when we think of bread, we could actually think of this very easily. Tell us how that's a sort of a business game changer from your grandfather.
Yeah, so you have to put back in context that in the early 30s, and truly the first part of the 20th century, there's never been as many people in Paris as there were. And so that's what allows for the rise. There's a bakery at every street corner, and an average French person
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
eats between, I'm actually having a hard time resisting stealing a piece before I started, but yeah. But so an average French person ate between 600 and 900 grams of bread per person and per day. And so what it means is that there's a lot of people, there's a need for bread, and so people go several times a day to a bakery and buy along their way the bread that they're going to consume throughout the day. A loaf like this, it's a big hug of bread, it weighs about 1.9 kilos. So an average French person living in Paris ate half of that every day. Where it was a game changer was that you could share that loaf, coming to the store, buy half of a loaf, bring it and have your day's worth of food in one go, and then participate in some ways in the community of people with whom you share bread from the bakery.
But it's also sort of a symbol, right? At the time, we're in
Yeah.
1932, the baguette, which is white bread,
Yeah.
was also sort of a symbol of wealth. It was the bread that you would get. This was sort of a countryside bread.
It was.
This is rustic,
Rustic,
old school.
peasant, old school, traditional. But it's the carrier of a sourdough. So to your question, how do you say pain au levain in English? Sourdough bread, which is a technique and not a category of breads. Sourdough is a piece of dough from one batch at Poilâne that we keep aside when we bake the dough, and we carry it on to the next batch. So basically, when you make bread, you have 4 ingredients: water, a grain flour, salt, and something that helps the bread rise. So in the early 30s and the early 20th century, it's all about the new technologies, white bread, which echoes wealth because only the rich people could afford to have white flour. And so people think, oh, that's super cool. And then the yeast, instead of using sourdough, helps to grow the bread faster. So again, you think that's amazing. But when you use sourdough, it's a labor of patience, and it's that link between past and present. And that's what helps nurture today, but feed tomorrow.
Tell us exactly how you make bread, because you just told us those simple 4 ingredients that have not changed much since mankind knows how to make bread. It seems very simple, yet it's very subtle. So, you know, it's something that we buy every day. It's something that you get at the Crous and the Cantine, although it's not the same one, I assume. It's something we take for granted, right? We've, especially if you're French. There is a bakery somewhere in the area somewhere. So tell us exactly, how do you make bread? What's the process?
So I'll tell you about the process. There's one thing, and I think as this school is called Sciences Po, I think you have to have something. I'll challenge you to think throughout the course of this interaction, if you can think of a single revolution that wasn't started for anything else than the lack of bread. Yes, we take bread for granted. We think it's something that's so obvious that we don't care about it. But it's something that has fed our civilizations in many, many ways. And to date, I haven't found a revolution that hasn't been started for the lack of food, and usually the basic staple food that we go back to when everything else is missing is bread. And you can all think of expressions related to that. L'on comme un jour sans pain, a falta de pan, comemos tortas. I don't know, I'm sure there's a wealth of languages in this room that we could share experiences of. But
Du pain et des jeux, games and bread.
Yeah. And so, to go back to your question, how do we bake bread? So, we have 4 ingredients. We're going to mix, and I'm going to simplify a little bit the recipe, but it will be one that, if you want to go into the adventure of baking bread at home, it'll be a starting point. So, water, a grain flour, salt, and a leavening agent. So, a piece of sourdough or some yeast. You mix them together. You let them rise the first time. Then you're going to cut out the pieces. So, typically, we'll cut a little over 2 kilos worth of dough, and we're going to shape them into its final form. So in this case, it's a big boule that we cradle in a basket, and it rises a second time. And once it has risen a second time, then we're going to put it on a big peel, a big spoon, or like a pizza tool. And we're going to put it into the oven, but drawing at Poilâne our signature scoring, which is a P for Poilâne, but also for pain, could also be Paris. And that scoring is both aesthetic and practical to help, one last time, having this human gesture which will really create a difference, because in our work as bakers, we really are accompanying the dough into giving its best at that moment in that batch.
How long does it take?
6 hours.
From the moment you sort of mix
Start
the dough,
mixing,
all right?
to the moment it's out of the oven. But that's a really good question, Alexandre, because when the bread comes out of the oven, you think, okay, it's over. But you can't touch the bread. It's too hot. So it has to rest. And that's a beautiful stage, because when you're baking bread, and especially when you bake a batch, we put the breads on a big rack, and the breads lose a little bit of water, and they start crackling. And when they start crackling, they start singing. And that sound is just really, really wonderful, and one that, if you're not attentive, you'll overlook. But that's really the last stage of baking bread. So it's probably more like 8 hours.
You make it sound... Is it all done by hand, first of all?
It is. But it's a really interesting point. I think It's not because it's made by hand that it's better. But at Poilâne, we pride ourselves into trying to find where our human hand gesture brings a value added. So the pétrin, the big mechanical mixer, that is a mechanical mixer. And we use that because we have a better quality dough, a more homogeneous dough, which has more energy than the two people that were affected to do just that at a time where we didn't have electricity. But other gestures, like shaping the dough, scoring the loaf, if you don't do it by hand, you don't come to appreciate how the dough is that day. And that's important because a little bit like us, there are moments and days where we're in a good mood, others when we feel a little tired, others where we feel full of energy. And the dough reacts in similar fashions. And so that's why the human hand can adapt. And throughout our experience, we can learn how to anticipate our gestures and really help bring the loaf to its best.
You say that the dough sort of has moods. What exactly does it react
What does it
to?
mean? All right, so I'll give you an example. If it's a super, super cold day and it's super, super wet outside, a little bit like us when we're under the sheets of our bed and we're like, oh, I really don't want to get out of the bed, the dough is the same way. It will have a hard time rising. And so us as bakers, what we need to do is give it a boost in our gestures so that we can shape it so that it can give the impulse so that it can rise beautifully. Conversely, in the middle of the summer, when it's super hot and dry, then we have the loaves that will tend to rise quite well, quite easy on their own. And in that case, we're going to have to tell the loaf, cool down, take your time. Because if you speed up, you're going to give your everything, and then you'll be dead by the time you're out of the oven, basically.
I don't want to get too much into the secret of your trade, but
I thought we were about sharing tonight.
no, it is. But this is trademark. I mean, I don't want to be sued. But I'm picturing a baker talking to its dough, because you're saying you should tell it to cool down or you should give it a boost. So I'm actually picturing a baker spraying Berocca on his dough to sort of help it grow, faster. What does it actually mean when you say you carry along the dough and how it reacts? Do you mean you add a bit more water, you add a bit more salt, or is it?
Yeah. So on a day, to go back to the example of a day where it's super hot, and the dough will tend to rise much faster because it's boosted by the environment. Then we will pour the water. We really are torturing the dough, actually, because what we do is we pour the water cold so that it slows down the fermentation. Conversely, on a super cold day, we need to warm up the ambiance. And so the way we do it is we bring the loaves closer to the oven, and therefore they have the heat that they don't have because it's the winter.
This is a recipe that exists worldwide. It's as ancient as bread is. The 4 same ingredients are the same. Of course, the quality of the grain might vary, but what makes the Poilâne bread then so special?
At least 2 things. Number 1, the sourdough. Since 1932, we've been taking a piece of dough from one batch and carrying it on to the next batch. So there's that fil rouge, there's that common ground, and that's something that gives a distinctive flavor to our loaves.
Wait, just to be clear, this means that in this, there are parts that
Of 1932.
sort of have flavored, carried throughout time.
Exactly.
It's still good to eat, though.
It is a loaf of the day, yeah? The other thing is, somewhere between ingredients, the quality of the ingredients, the relationships we've developed with our producers, our millers, and the know-how we develop in our bakers so that they can carry on baking this bread, but also being attentive to what's going on, to carry in appearance only a sense of constance, whereas from one day to the next, we're constantly changing, fine-tuning. That's also part of the secret. It's the know-how.
And just to get a better sense, how much bread do you bake each day?
It's a really good question because I think you need to have a sense of scale. So an average batch of bread baked at 8 Rue du Cherche-Midi, where we have an oven underneath the store, It's a wood-fired oven. It's bricks. It's super heavy, and it's beautiful because batch after batch, since really the French Revolution, when my father found traces of a bakery there, there's been a baker. So you can tell that time has really coated the walls in a specific way. In that oven, we can bake 70 loaves at a time, 70 of those loaves. We'll bake anywhere between 30 and 50 per batch so that we can bake throughout the day, have constantly fresh bread or warm bread, you choose the word. And at our manufacture, where we have 24 ovens, 24 bakehouses, exactly like in the store here, but ground level and in daylight and so on and so forth. And in those ovens, we can bake 100 loaves at a time. Now, why 100? It's just easier to count. And this way, we can have a batch that we can retail to wholesalers or restaurants.
This is the manufacture because, as you rightfully said, the hand comes into play. But that is a huge amount of bread. This means you now have a network. This means you're more than just a bake, right? This is a company of its own. How many bakeries do you have? How many restaurants are you catering to? How big is the Poilâne network?
So we're a team of about 130 people doing the breads, the pastries, the cookies. We have about 60 bakers. We sell, we deliver, and then we also do administrative work. But we then have 5 stores in Paris. We have a store in London for the past 24 years. And we have about a little over 900 wholesalers and restaurants using our breads.
This is because, as you rightfully said, it started in 1932. Then your father took over. He developed the brand alongside with your mother. And then they passed away, sadly, together in an accident. That was in 2002, 31st of October. You're 18 at that time. You were on your way to Harvard University. And yet, you decided to take over, carry on the legacy. You could have sold the company, you could have hired somebody to look over the company, but you're 18, you're an undergrad, and you decide to run the business. Was not taking over ever an option? Did you think for 1 minute, in the grief that was that moment, in the pain, in the sorrow, did you think that you could do something else? Or did you immediately felt that you as a baker and you as a Poilâne was going to lead that company?
In the fall of 2002, there was, after my parents passed, there was a sense of obviousness for me to take over the family business. And that was fed by a few things. First of all, I grew up in this business. I was planning on taking over the business at some point. And when my parents passed away, they had an accident. It was very clear that they hadn't survived it. And I had an understanding of the business because I grew up with my father, who essentially basically chaperoned me into that, in the role that I would slowly, surely much later, would have done. So there was a sense of, I knew things that it would take me so long to share and to teach others that it was better to do with my father's team and to be able to do it with them instead of getting someone training them, and by that time that would have been irrelevant. But the point is, for me there was a sense of obviousness to take over the family business. And what I find remarkable is that 22 years after my parents passed away, there still is that sense of obviousness. And not necessarily for all the same reasons, and I think that's a super good reason, but that to me is remarkable. And that's what excites me. I get excited in the morning because of the clients that I'm going to meet, about the new challenges of the day, about the variety of what my job has to offer.
You're a baker yourself. It means you actually bake the bread. You're not just the head of the business. We all have this image of the bread maker waking up at 4 in the morning because, as you said, it takes 6 hours. So what time do you get up in the morning?
Yeah, no. So I don't wake up at 4 a.m. every morning. And the reality is that I am a baker by training, and it's important for me to put it forward, but I don't bake every day. I wake up on the earlier side of things, but it's still pretty late for a lot of people, between around 6 a.m., basically.
Quick question. Who thinks 6 a.m. is kind of late?
Yeah, you're students.
Right.
I don't know, I'm just this is a total side note, but I studied for 4 years in Boston, and I will say that there were there are 3 things that allowed me to do a combination of both my studies and taking care of my business. The structure of American universities, which really favor your development outside of the class, time difference, and to get to the more essential part, I also had a really good team. But the other thing was, most classes did not start before 10 a.m. because the professors knew that they wouldn't get a student at 9 a.m. in the class. So for me, it just took me to wake up earlier, which came as pretty naturally for an early riser, and it helped me. But, you know, I thought about this, but a lot of people wake up super early. Like, you're still young enough that you're not, maybe, or it's not, you're probably more like when I was a student, going to bed late and waking up a little later, but...
I still want to get a sense of this. You've been training to be a baker, to become a baker, since you were 16. That's how you knew the business, that's how you knew the people, that's how you knew the team. When you decide to take over, you're 8, again, sorry, I want to say that. Quick question. Who thinks that he or she would be able to run a business, forget about 18 today? Do you think you're right? Good, he's a student of mine, yes. Who thinks he or she could have run a business when you were 18? Right. So, hell, I can't run a business, and I'm slightly above 18. You're 18. You decide to.
I work with a team.
You work with a team, but you're still this figure of the company. Was it very common at that time to have a woman, let alone a very young one, at the head of a baking company?
Absolutely not. And I will say, to go into a more personal matter, that this is a time where people distributed business cards. On my business, a lot of the people that I met at the time thought that I had only a representation role in the family business. So I put on my business cards baker and president of the company. And the reason was, I wanted people to understand that my craft was baking, and I wasn't just in a representation role.
We have this image, so you were training since you were 16. We have an image, probably, at least throughout French culture, we know better how training in the cooking world works. And it's a very tough world. There's a huge hierarchy. There's a lot of violence involved, whether it's a physical or verbal abuse. It's also extremely patriarchal. The chefs tend to be older men. How about the baking world? How do you perfect your craft? How do you train into becoming a baker? And how violent is that path?
So I can talk about Poilâne, but I will, and I don't want you to take my example. I don't know enough about the traditional or the usual or the, let's say the more, I don't know much about how it works in baking schools across the board. But at Poilâne, the way we go about training is we find one master baker and we have one apprentice, and they pair together. And for 9 months, they're going to transfer their knowledge. So on the first day, the apprentice is looking, observing what the master baker is doing. And little by little, the roles inverse. So we don't have that sense of violence. We don't have that sense of aggressivity. There isn't that notion of the brigade that you have in the kitchen. And I think that's something that's very specific about Poilâne. For 9 months, we train our bakers to attune, or their bakers in the make, to attune their 5 senses to how to be listening, perceiving, broadly speaking, in all senses of the term, really. How do you bake bread? And that's an approach that cannot be done if you're done in opposition. It's about accompanying the person. And it's about helping them build a confidence and starting to build a library of experiences that will make their know-how.
So, legacy then becomes a critical part of that sort of transmission. It's all about passing on the knowledge. It's about passing on the dough that has been worked on since 1932. You have a double legacy then. You've been trained by the same people who were crafting these bread, which has your family name on it. And then there's the legacy of your grandfather and then your father. So how free are you in that context? For any of you, this is the main or the original bakery is literally 2 blocks away. You can walk past it every day on your way here. It looks as delicious as any French bakery would. It smells incredible. But are you able to do anything you want in that space? Would you be able, I want to get to a precise thing, would you be able to propose a cronut? So a cronut is a croissant mixed with a donut. It's something which is illegal in France, pretty much. Or, you know, I don't know, a cinnamon or pumpkin spiced infused Paris-Brest. Can you do anything you want, or this has your name on it, this is a signature bread, and this is the extent of your freedom?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, because what you're saying is, and I think the topic of our talk is exactly that. What is the place for creativity in a world or in a company where there's something about transmission? And so in working on the title of our exchange today, Florence and I talked about it, and then we prepared our exchange. And for me, there's something first about continuity and understanding your bases, your ABCs. And then from there, from this cadre or from these tools, then we can recreate whatever we want. I don't do a cronut at Poilâne mainly because I have too much appreciation for Dominique Ancel's creation. But we have our own cronuts. We do a cornbread. We didn't work with corn flour until I started bringing cornbread. And that's because, it's a mix of my French-American culture, because I'm half French, half American, and it's also the creativity, the creative spirit. Sorry, I'm going to be a little nervous about my use of the words here, but it's a spirit also that my grandfather started and my father pursued and nurtured, and that for us, it's about a sense of like, we have a sense of curiosity in our family and experience and experiments and testing and trying that eventually nurtures our creativity. So for me, I see the bakery as a framework, and it's a terrain in which my tools are grains and fermentation to create delicious things.
There's another element that could be sort of, you know, a limit to that creativity, which are your clients. Because this is a sort of not exactly a household feature, but it's a landmark, right? You go to get the Poilâne bread. Yeah. How would they react if they walked into one of your bakery and they saw a cronut?
I don't know, but we're going to have to try. But what I was going to say is this is where you, working in communications and marketing, will understand and probably sophisticate what I'm going to say. I think that there's something about embarking our clients on a journey that things evolve over time. The same way that from one batch to the next, we handle the dough in a different way. The same way that from one season to the next, the grain is different because the weather was different that year in the field. And so for me, that sense of change is a constant. And embarking our clients is the mission that we need to have in saying, well, we need to make it obvious for you that this is, the cronut is the next thing you need to eat, so to speak. And what I would add on that one is that there's certain recipes, like our wheat sourdough loaf, where for 92 years, we've perfected the recipe. So there's no point in revolutionizing that one. But there are other products, like my cornbread, which I've developed only since 2006. So it's more likely than not that over time, I'll adapt it.
You just mentioned, you just used terms that are used in every company in the world, but that sort of takes us back to the very business aspect of this, which is it's not just about taste, right? It's about developing a company, and you said it has over 130 employees. So we're talking about a massive revenue stream, a need for continuous, not necessarily grow, but at least a steady thing. So where do you find the balance between quantity and quality? I mean, I assume the more bread you sell, the better your revenues are. So how do you find the balance between craftswomanship and entrepreneurship? Do you have like a 3-year plan to open 10 new bakeries, to have one in every major airport in Europe and sell them cronuts?
I think you're exactly right. And you're pointing the two elements that are really important, quality and quantity. And that was something my father instilled quite early on in my childhood. It was like he preferred quality over quantity. But of course, the reality is a little more subtle than that, because to give you an example, when you bake a batch of bread, if you make a loaf or a batch of 30 to 100 of breads, you actually will have a better quality than if you at home create one single loaf. And whereas you think, well, maybe if I have one loaf, I can put more intention in it and have a better, I can have more impact on that specific loaf. But the reality is that that single loaf is alone. The batch has a momentum. And so in our crafts, there is that sense of, and that balance that is, and by nature balance is imbalanced, between quality and quantity. So I'm not going to make batches of 200 loaves of this sourdough bread because it just won't fit into the oven. The only way I could make it fit is maybe in a tunnel oven. And at that point, I lose the benefits of using a wood-fired oven, and and of course that would change the taste. And so in trying to change something and trying to have that mix of that conversation between past techniques and contemporary techniques, the quality is the guide to distinguish what should be kept and what should not.
So that's the link between 1932 and now. Yes, a question.
I was wondering, because you mentioned culture and how you embrace the tradition of the bread and how you made it better, perfected it, and that. But what do you make of what your grandfather's original idea of just feeding people for a while and having this different bread in Paris today? Like actually the activity of selling it to people, like what's your frame on it now regarding what you were saying about quality, quantity, and yeah.
Well, I think that's something that's really beautiful about the way, so my grandfather started baking this loaf and he was like, this is something that can really feed people, that can share, that creates a community. And what I think my father did, which was really incredible, was create this manufacture where it's a big round building where we have 24 ovens, one next to the other, and we can build larger quantities of bread, but in the same way my grandfather could do, so past and present techniques. And that structure allows us to aggregate more retailers and have a bigger yield. So I'm super proud to be in some ways increasing and building on that with something that intrinsically has good taste and that keeps and that nurtures the sharing of bread. Does that answer your question?
Would you say that today what your activity is more, how do I say,
Is it sort of a social mission to feed people, or is it developing the company? Right? Is that?
Not the company, but actually keeping on this legacy, which is great in itself. But what comes first?
For me, it's the product that comes first, because the quality of the bread is what will sustain you in the long run. And that's why if someone came up to me and said to me, you know, tomorrow I'm going to put X millions and we're going to do 100,000 stores, I would be terrified by it, because I know we wouldn't be able to go from where we are now to that. And so I think I'm closer to the former thing.
I also have a question. So generally, like at Tower where I'm from, a lot of bakeries have been closing down because they lack a lot of the apprenticeships, I think, that are willing to go to craftsmanship. And I was wondering if you experienced similar struggles in your bakery. Like it's hard for people, especially from the younger generation, because I feel like it becomes harder, especially in big cities, to have people to do that. So
Did you all hear that or not really?
Yeah,
So the question was coming from a testimony of having lots of bakeries closing around because it's hard to actually find people who are willing to be trained in the art of baking, because it's an apprenticeship, and because it is, although you don't get up, you get up very late at 6, but it is a tough training and it takes a lot out of people. So do you have the same problems about finding people who are willing to get into the trade?
Absolutely. And I think whereas in the past few years, people have said, oh, it's been so much harder since the pandemic to hire people, to train people, to retain people. In the past 22 years, there has never been a time in my trade where it's been easy to hire and to train people. Just to give you one reference point, on 10 people who will start their apprenticeship at us, maybe one person will stay and for the long run. So it's hard, and it's an art, and it's a really imperfect trade. I think there's a reality to our craft that it is undervalued, underappreciated, and I realize that that's especially true if you're in a place where there isn't enough footfall to sustain the bakery. There's any number of constraints in bread baking that have given rise to any number of ways in which we can cut corners. And the creativity in the realm of cutting corners is only as big as the toughness of our craft. So the way we work at Poilâne, using a wood-fired oven, baking one batch at a time, and each batch is the responsibility of a single person that from start to finish accompanies the loaf. That we can only do that because we've been around for 92 years, and that we've been able to develop the fellowship. But yes, I would love to invite you to look at your baker as someone who really has a mission to feed a community, and that we keep that mission, or we keep that person's fire alive by buying their bread and valuing their work. It's a tough job, and it's also an incredible job.
I want to get back to something you said about interacting with your clients, and I actually work in a bakery. So do you think that proximity to your customer is something that is exclusive to local smaller bakeries, and is being such an exceptional brand makes you kind of lacking this communal sense
So the question is, just because I'm not sure all of you heard, one of your fellow students works in the bakery, and this sense of proximity, the fact that you can see the corner and you can sometimes see the baker and that you can see the people who are making the bread is very important. And so the question is, you being now such a hallmark brand, does that mean that you lose this sense of community and of proximity because you run a business and also a bakery?
Yeah. Short answer, no. And the reason is because our biggest customers are people that we see on average 5 times a week. And so we develop a relationship with them. At Poilâne, our teams in the store, they usually are on average about the same. They're the same that stay there and on the same shifts, and they create habits and they have knowledge of their clients. So much so that what we have a hard time doing is organizing things so that people, whether it's our clients or our teams, so that they don't just rely on their heads to remember about the order of this client that they see every Thursday, because there is that sense of proximity.
I have a question regarding the symbolic of the bread. It's before you said that it's so in the 30s it was like kind of coming from the countryside and like the bread with peasants, etc. And the baguette is far in a way. But like, so I'm trying to see now how it's evolved because I'm from Morocco, and in Morocco baguette is completely embedded in the culture. Like we call it Parisian in Arabic, so it's already like the big chicken. We also have our own Moroccan bread, but this we don't really have the kind of like big bread that is. And now it started coming, I think, a few years ago, but it kind of became like a premium, like kind of social marker of a higher like level higher incomes of people who buy this kind of bread. And I want to know if it's and I don't know about here because you can find it more easily. But do you think that it kind of shifted in a way?
So your question was about what is the perception to date of this kind of bread, and it's
Is it also what
and how.
perception you want to?
Yeah. So in 1932, when my grandfather did this kind of bread, he was seen as so backwards that the syndicate of bakers threw him out. They said, "You're not doing the white breads that we want to be promoting. You're out." And then, fast forward a few years, people slowly realized that white bread is not so good for your health, that there are other types of breads. And so this bread that used to be the countryside loaf, the peasant's bread, has been perceived as a more quality bread and has more attractivity to it. But I think these are cycles. And I think that it's great that in the recent years in France, people have valued more and more this kind of bread. But to share something that I think is both a dirty little secret, but also a reality of our craft, is you can give the illusion of this kind of bread in terms of looks without having 92 years of a sourdough. So when you're on the real authentic thing, yeah, I mean, this is pretty amazing and it speaks of itself. But there's a reality to different trends to take over other trends. And to that extent, just to conclude, the baguette was in France a pain de fantaisie. And the reason why bakers started baking it in the early 20th century, as I understand it, is that they wanted to escape price controls. So they started doing this bread, it escaped price controls, and the irony of that is that post-World War II, the baguette's prices are capped, and we get into that cycle again. And now to date, I think customers' willingness to pay is something else that caps the price of the breads. So the short answer is perceptions go in cycles, but at the end of the day, what I think really matters is what bread are you going to eat to sustain you now, but onwards?
Oh, great questions. Just if you think this is a joke, know that in France, not only the prices of the baguette are legally capped, but so is the recipe. There's a law. I mean, the député sat down, discussed, and voted that a baguette is a baguette. This is how serious it is. I saw questions everywhere, so why don't we start with you there, and we'll listen to your 3 questions at once so that it gives you a bit more time to answer. We'll start right there, please.
What do you think of the competition that stems from usually foreign bakeries that use the image of French but doesn't have anything with it? I'm thinking of Paris baguette.
I knew you were going to say that.
And because I asked this question because last year I was in Korea and I went into a bakery and there was a croissant with a sausage in it and with the mayonnaise and barbecue sauce on it. No?
Okay, this is offensive. So the first question is, how about competition and the use of the image of the baguette? We had a question, yes.
Hi, I'm like loving the conversation. I'm actually from Boston too. I have 2 questions. What was like an example maybe of like a moment that was a pivot for you in terms of your business, your creativity, like can you give an example? And then what's also your like daily routine? What do you do and how do you integrate your creativity into that?
And I'll add one to that. What do you have for breakfast? And, okay, 2, yes?
So, since your product is a fast-moving consumer good, and there is a lot in the market, including the supermarkets, and not, but still your business is very limited in terms of the market because you are, as I understand, targeting people who really understand the difference between industrial grade bread and sort of specialized bakery. Do you plan to widen your market segment, or do you plan to just work on the existing market and create more loyalty?
I have almost the same question, but I think my question is more about how do you inspire your employees to stay true to your identities when there is like so many more competition and people are trying to outsell each other. So how do you lead in that scenario?
Okay. I'll start by the end. The projects, plural, that we nurture at Poilâne is what feeds our ethos and what keeps people going, staying, wanting to believe, and also wanting to participate in that adventure. And when I see places like Paris Baguette, and I knew you were going to come up with Paris Baguette as an example when you started describing this, and when you're talking about the sausage croissant, the one thing I can think of is when I was in Boston, I would oftentimes miss dinner, and my roommate, who was from New York, was like, "Oh, let's go to Au Bon Pain. They have the best spinach croissant." And I remember thinking to myself, okay, so spinach croissants are not a thing. It's quite offensive.
Wait, this was your roommate. Did she
This was-
know what you were doing?
Like, yeah.
Sort of like...
It's a longer story. But the reality was, I was just appalled by it. And then eventually I realized, well, it can work, you know? Like the sweetness of the dough of the croissant, if you really understand what it tastes like, why not? And what I think that companies like Paris Baguette have really understood is a sense of the imagination that it captures in people of creating the French spirits of sorts. Sometimes, I probably will attract many unpleasant comments on this, but I do think that sometimes some foreign bakeries actually do it better than us in France, because, and especially with viennoiserie, because we don't value in a bakery the price of a croissant or pain au chocolat the way we do in a foreign market where we don't have those price references. So I think I love to travel and to see different baking traditions, but also how people interpret our traditions, because that's my reference point, and how can it feed my creativity and open new boundaries that I would have otherwise, as a French person, said, oh, no, you can't do that. And so in the book that I published 5 years ago, I had a few recipes of what I thought would be an absolute insult until then, which was creating recipes of sandwiches using the croissant as the bread. Why not? If you understand what is the specific texture and tastes and flavors of a croissant, I think you can do a pretty good job.
So that was one question regarding the international competition and how you could use this image. We also had a question about how you motivate your employees to stay within that legacy. Another one concerning broadening your market, your client base, and whether you keep it to those 5 bakeries. This is already quite an empire. And we also had questions about one pivotal moment. How do you nurture your own creativity in your sort of daily routine? And from me, what do you eat for breakfast? Yep. So, in any order that you.
So how do you want to go about this?
Whatever works best for you.
Right. So, at Poilâne, what we strive to do is to make the most of grains and fermentation to feed our clients, our community of people that come to us, doing breads, pastries, and cookies. Yes, we do cater to some extent to a niche market, but I think the common point between all of our clients, whether they go to a supermarket to buy a quarter of a loaf that they're going to freeze, take out of the toaster, and put in their toaster for breakfast, or whether they come to the bakery and buy their apple tart for Saturday, is they have, to some extent, more or less sophisticated, a sense of, I want to have something that's going to feed me. My job at the head of Poilâne is to also nurture people's minds so that they can understand that when they're eating a piece of bread, they're also participating in the sourdough of the bakery at large. So in speaking to you today, I'm doing a little bit of that because I'm sure that in this room there are people that, until we taste bread, have never had my bread or maybe didn't even know the existence of my company. But it's also the reason why I write books to say, for instance, how to use your bread from crust to crumb, or how just trying to understand or just sharing the greater poetry of bread. I did with a student in literature a few years ago. I did an anthology of texts that talked about bread. So what I'm trying to do is, in all ways and shapes, and is trying to expand on that. I think I'll share 2 moments that I think were pivotal for me in terms of creativity and how do I think about my business. Number 1 was taking a loaf of bread, the big hug of sourdough wheat bread, and keeping it 20 days fresh in Brittany. I'm being precise about the place because I think that the saline air helped a little bit. I usually tell my clients that they can keep this bread for anywhere between 4 to 6 days fresh. The fact that I managed to keep this bread fresh for 21 days, for me, was incredible. I was like, wow, how can a loaf keep that long? It's not because that I was good at it, it's because that loaf is that good that it can keep. But the other thing I found remarkable was, I find that remarkable. At that point, it had been 12 years since I had been in charge of the business. I was like, if me, after 12 years of being in charge of the business, still think that's incredible, I think that's very telling about how much I love my craft. Another realization that was pivotal for me was understanding that my craft is about grains and fermentation. And that's also, that in some ways was a game changer because for me it was about understanding that it's not about just baking bread, the newest product or the newest cronut or the latest flavor of this kind of loaf, but it's about using grains as the base and fermentation to magically or to create something new. And that to me opened up a wealth of possibilities in terms of ideas and products. So to give you a concrete example, a few years ago, I went to Bertillon, which is an iconic ice cream maker on Ile Saint-Louis, and the third generation at theirs, and I made a toasted bread ice cream. And then I said to him, look, my job is about grains and fermentation. I would like you to try and make an ice cream using not cow's milk, but using oat milk. And I was like, if there's one person that will manage to do this, it will be him. And little did I know, just creating that, it was just a test and trial. We did it with hazelnut, and the taste of that hazelnut ice cream was so radically different from any ice cream you would have elsewhere. It didn't have the creaminess, the cow's milk's creaminess that dissolves the taste of the hazelnut. And it didn't have the crystals of sugar and water, salt of a sorbet. And that was a game changer. I was like, oh my God, this is just a test. But turns out it really brings something to the ice cream. And so we started creating a whole series of recipes of ice creams and sorbets, where we try to boost 3 aspects of the grain: oat milk for the texture, to really boost the flavor of what flavor it was supporting; grains for their actual flavor, like we did a sweet corn and vanilla ice cream, and the sweet corn gives a body to the ice cream, which makes it so much more delicious and gourmand and yeah.
Oh,
Carry on. I saw you. And we also did one where, and this is the part where I got a little malicious, I was thinking, okay, so growing up, I really loved macadamia nut brittle from Haagen-Dazs. And I thought, can I do a grain brittle, one that would one day surpass Haagen-Dazs's staple? And so for that one, we took a seasonal fruit sorbet and we put our bread granola in it. And we don't have the grain brittle yet, but it's a work in progress. So that's how, from grain, there's no fermentation in the ice creams, thankfully, we get to something really completely and radically different. You asked me about my breakfast routine.
Yes. I mean, because we have to realize something. We all eat bad bread. I mean, after all, we get bread wherever we can. What happens when you eat bad bread? I mean, you can probably taste everything in it. So what do you have for breakfast so that it, So I start
off my day properly?
Yeah, you knowing the secrets of all the trades,
so
that we can write it down and eat it ourselves.
Yeah, so the first thing is you'll have gathered I'm an early riser, and as an early riser, I love to have breakfast. It's my moment where I will have some tea, some coffee. I can have I try to eat seasonal fruit, but invariably I will have a slice of bread, in one way, shape, or form or another. A pain perdu if I'm on some more stale pieces of bread with an egg. That's a perfect, good start for your day. But I also have and this is a great tip for you guys when you at home, is take 2 slices and put it in the slot of a toaster, or try and make sure that only one side of the toast is toasted, because it keeps a little bit of moist, and so your tartine doesn't dry out, but it remains crunchy, fresh, and warm. So you can even do this ahead of time, beyond the fact that if you have a traditional toaster, you can probably you'll have a better yield. So those are things that are in my routines daily. Having a good start of my day, waking up early, having a good breakfast, and then checking in with my teams, having moments to get some work done, going about my day with the different appointments I have. That's a little bit of a sense of the routine.
Regarding teams, how do you sort of get them to, sort of carry on that legacy, which is, of course, yours, but has to become theirs?
Yeah, so I'll try and I try and involve them in how I perceive things so that they can enrich my ideas. I try to delegate recipes and testings and things to put in place so that we can all be, I can't single-handedly do everything. It's as simple as that. So we have to work together to make it work. And the truth is, a dialogue with people is usually more fruitful to have a proper answer or have something that will be that'll be deeper than just the surface of I have this vision and I'm going to impose it. So it's about sharing the vision, helping people participate. And once I've said all of that, I am absolutely imperfect about it. So I make mistakes like everyone else, and it's about testing, trying, recommitting, and not being afraid of failing.
And in that process, regarding expanding the business, have you ever thought about, I don't know, being in supermarkets?
We are in supermarkets.
I know that.
For me, being in a supermarket, I have some clients who say to me, "Oh, it's not so cool that you're in a supermarket." I'm like, "Well, if you see me in the supermarket, that means I am exactly where I need to be because you are shopping there and you're seeing my bread. And I am giving you the luxury of the convenience of being able to pick up your bread in one single stop." The fallacy, I mean, it's fantastic if you live close to one of my bakeries, and honestly, the experience is incomparable. If you come to one of my bakeries, you'll have the freshness, you'll have the whole experience, and that is invaluable. But it's not everyone's reality. And I'm super proud of my bread, just in case that wasn't clear. And so for me, being able to distribute my bread is the opportunity to have a wider reach. So it goes back to your question earlier. And so that's something that I'm actually quite proud of.
You talked about how your craft is.
I mean, if you're gonna have a bread, and if you're gonna have very little for lunch because you don't have time, if you don't have time to run your errands and you're gonna go to the supermarket as a one-stop shop, great. Why not have the best product?
You just mentioned that this product goes from grain, literally, to bread. Does climate change affect the way you work? Does it change the way our bread will taste? Does it affect the amount of bread you can actually bake? How much of that tidal wave are you taking into account when making the product?
So for us, from one season to the next, we have a new batch of, grains from that year's harvest. So every year, it's a completely new distribution. Think of it, it's a harvest. So it's like wine, there are vintages, and there's some vintages that are better than others. And so some years, we have to compose with grains that are not as cool, that don't have as much elasticity for as long. Some years, we have grains with a lot of protein that will tend to be very rough, and so we need to learn how to loosen it up. And so over the past 22 years, I have seen more hectic changes in the weather patterns, and that I can see because we have a bread chandelier. A chandelier my father made so in 1969, my father met Salvador Dali, and they corresponded for a while until Salvador Dali asked my father to make a whole bedroom made out of bread.
Casually. Her father was pen pal with Salvador Dali.
If you go on Google and YouTube, if you Google and YouTube Lionel Poilâne, Salvador Dali, you'll see a little segment. It's super cute. Since that time, we've had a bread chandelier in the back room of the bakery.
Sorry, but what is a bread chandelier? I'm thinking.
It's a chandelier with
made of bread.
Made of bread.
Right. All of this is becoming like a Walt Disney movie to me. All right. So you have a chandelier made of bread. I'm almost anticipating that it can talk, but carry on.
And so this chandelier, we make it, but of course, it has a life cycle to it. And eventually, it starts crumbling a little bit, and we replace it. And what I have noticed over the years is that it doesn't keep for as long. And it doesn't keep for as long because what kills it, so to speak, is the differences in temperature. The humidity, the temperature influence and make the dough work in a way that it makes it as resilient as the dough is. There's a point where it works more. And that's been harder. And so that's where I've seen how how climate change has changed baking at higher view than at the very daily way that from one batch to the next, whether that depending on how the weather is, how that influences the batch.
Yes, I was going to say you have more questions. Yes, if you have a question, now is the time. So we're going to go from right to left. We're going to take all your questions at once. Start here.
Why restaurants would choose your bread comparing to Boucheron or Kaiser, other, like for the real restaurants?
Okay, so the question is, why would restaurants choose your bread over other brands, which I will not name? Yes. So coming from a testimony, your brand is very well known in Japan, and is that the result of a strategy, of something you carefully crafted? Yes?
Talking about climate change, I was thinking like the packaging you're using to keep, I think, bread like well less plastic. Is there another way to keep it that way?
Is there another way to keep bread fresh rather than plastic? Because as we talked about climate change and let's bring in biodiversity, this is a major topic.
So you said earlier that you got deals with famous restaurants. So my question is like, how can we conceive bread as an old part of the gastronomic meal?
Sorry, can you repeat the question just because I didn't hear it correctly?
The parts of the bread in gastronomic meal.
Okay, what's the part of bread in a gastronomic meal? Yes? I think this is going to work better.
You said that you publish the books, also have accessories related to your business. And I checked your Instagram account, I mean Poland's Instagram account, and there are about 173,000 followers. And my question is about the content creation and the role of the social media strategy in your business, how you evaluate the content, the pictures or images you share every day to your followers, because it's quite a lot, this amount of followers for the bakery.
Right, question here.
I had more question on the personal side. I was wondering what was your first memory related to bread and what was your fondest memory related to, same, the company?
Thank you.
It's going back, sorry, on the conversation, and I was wondering if there was a reason behind your use of the words continuity and transmission rather than tradition.
Thank you. My question was, how did you manage your business with school and maybe with the fear of failure? And like, do you have advices for students who are also entrepreneurs? Thank you.
Hi, my question is a little bit related. It was regarding, I remember how you said that it was complicated to assume your role in the industry overall. I was wondering on a smaller scale, maybe when you get into this firm and you have to work with, I don't know, men that have worked with your parents for like 15 years, how do you at the same time still know that you can learn from them, but also assume your role like being the boss, you know? How do you find the equilibrium in that?
Any more questions? Because that's about 15. I lost entirely track of all of them. So I entirely rely on you to answer as you best like.
As the notes, okay. So, why are my breads in restaurants? And why do people choose me over my competitors? I think first thing is that we've been around for longer than all of the people you've cited. and so we've built a tradition of serving restaurants. Something that I have found, I'm putting just a very dry business hat on, but I think that things that people like about my bread is that it'll keep a few days in the kitchen. So it's not like at the end of a service or your batch of baguettes is dead, so you're left with nothing. And it's large enough that it has more resilience than the smaller breads that some of my competition does. And in France, we also have a tradition of making tartines, which echoes the question about what is the place of bread in meals. It's a particular place. There's breads that come to accompany the meal, and whereas it was the center of a meal 100 years ago, and that was the main food people ate, and I will dare to say that I think that religions chose bread as a symbol because how do you educate a mass to your doctrine if not by their stomach, by what you basically need to eat? So I think that in this early 21st century, we're lucky that our food has, broadly speaking, has diversified, which means there's at least two obvious places for bread now. One of them is places where, like a sandwich or a tartine, where you use the bread as a plate or as something that will support the meal that's inside. But it can also be something where it accompanies whatever food you're having, and it will wash your mouth until the next part of the meal. And that's where I think that you should have an approach to bread a little bit like a sommelier would have of pairing their meal with a glass of wine or a piece of bread. You asked a question about Japan, and I think this dates back, so the short answer is that my parents got to go to Japan in the 70s and 80s and 90s at a time where France and Japan were having a lot of exchanges on the gastronomical side. And we were some of the very first bakers to go out there along with chefs, and it's created a long legacy of people knowing about our company, and we've been very fortunate that owing to that, we are present in a lot of guides, and it's incredible to be able to serve people that come from halfway around the world to us. I'm very proud of that. Then we talked about packaging, and you asked, why do we have plastic? So there's a few ways you can keep bread, and we have our brown paper bag, which is great when you go to the bakery. But when you go to the supermarket, what we found is that our clients want to see the bread to be able to buy it. The plastic we use is a recyclable plastic, and if you do a composite material, it isn't. So people often say to us, oh yeah, well, but what if you did something with a window? Well, it actually is not recyclable anymore. So to date, I don't think it's perfect, and I don't think that if my bread was sold in a package where you didn't see what was going in it, that people would buy as much. So the short answer is it's a work in progress, and the best answer we have right now is that this is recyclable. The way you keep bread, and I'm saying this because a lot of times, this is a friend of mine who was studying in Strasbourg, and she was saying to me, something that I love about your bread, Apollonia, is that when I was a student in Strasbourg, I would buy Monday through Friday a baguette, €1, and I would have spent €5 by Friday, and I was left with nothing. The same €5 I spend at your bakery, I have bread that keeps well beyond the weekend. What I'm trying to say is that I'm a better deal than the baguette, just in case I wasn't clear enough on that one. But what I'm trying to say is that to keep bread properly, you need to keep it in a packaging that if you're in a very, very dry environment, then plastic is actually a pretty good insulator. Whereas if you're in a very humid place, a cloth or paper will create a little bit of a sponge to create that balance. And that's for you to figure out in your own home, but it's a good way of saying you can prolong bread. And then there's also many ways you can cook with bread, making it an ingredient, and that's a whole other story. That's part of the reason why I'm on social media. when I was a freshman at Harvard, Facebook came about. So that's how we had a Facebook page back in the day. And then Instagram came about, and I'm a young enough generation that social media is part of where we come from and something that I want to cultivate, because for me, it's the opportunity of sharing my knowledge, my know-how, sharing ideas, tips, and broadening that community and that culture of bread. I sometimes also share memories or things that I like. And first memory about bread, the first one that comes to mind is something that my father used to do, and something that I'll invite you to do when you take a piece of bread later, is how to taste bread. So take a piece, open it in two, and start smelling it. And that's something that I remember my father doing all the time, is just smelling the bread and then eating it and savoring it. One of my fondest memories was managing to shape my first loaf of bread in the oven. And that was extraordinary because I had the impression of giving life, a breath, to this loaf of bread that I was struggling to shape before that. And I thought, I think it's very much like the impression of it's incredible to bake bread at home and to have that experience. And so that was something that I thought was really remarkable. I often talk about continuity and transmission, and I don't love the word tradition because, on the one hand, tradition and habits is very much part of what Poilâne is, but I think that in the wrong hands, tradition becomes, in French you would say un carcan, or it becomes something that would just become still and stiff. And I think at Poilâne, our tradition is that conversation between past and present. And so I'm just cautious when I use the word tradition for that reason. How do I reconcile work, or did you want to?
No, I'm trying to actually follow along your answers and see if we missed somebody.
Yeah.
And I'm counting those people who leave, by the way. That's one more cookie for me. The balance.
So the question was, how can you be at school and be an entrepreneur? So I think, how do you balance it? Honestly, super hard, imperfect. It goes something along the lines of you have to be very firm about the time you spent. To give you a very concrete example, I remember that when I was at university, if I had shit to get done by the end of the evening, I would go for dinner at 5:30 p.m. because I knew that I would see no one in the cafeteria. If I had a little more time for myself and that I could chit-chat, then I would go at 6 or 6:30, see my friends, and then it would carry on until 8, and I'll have a little less time to study or to get some of my work done. So I don't think I'm in a position to give you any suggestions, but something that's worked for me was having structure at some point and knowing also what you're trying to do. Why are you doing the things you're doing? And I think that is also a guide to distinguish, I'll do this or I'll do that.
And her last question was, when you became the head of the company, how did you find the right position when talking to people about, you said you immediately said you were not just the front woman of the company,
Yeah.
but so how did you deal with people who had dealt with your parents,
Yeah.
and there you were, an 18 undergrad saying, sorry, I'm the boss?
And, yeah, it's super hard because I think that, first of all, I think there's the nature of the way my parents passed away. It was a brutal accident, and I think that helped a lot to foster an in-between. The respect I hope I had along the way with my teams is something that helped. The fact that my father had a great structure in his business also helped nurture this. And also dialogue. I mean, when you're 18 years old, I had a lot of the understanding of what my father wanted to do, but I didn't have work experience. So it can only be through dialogue and conversations that you can create, and I think, I guess, patience is also something that helps. But it's imperfect, and even to this day, I have people who come up to me and who say, "Oh, I knew your father," or "Your father used to do this." Not necessarily in the bakery, by the way, but I think that in the bakery we're pretty cool with it. We just tag along, but I think when people share these stories, it's about that sense of community exchange and greeting, how that comes about.
I know the feeling. You talked a lot about food. You talked a lot
Getting
about
hungry.
bread. You talked about ice cream. That was a cruel one.
We were cruel, I'm sorry.
I mean, they've been very patient.
Yes,
Can we taste some of
we
it?
can absolutely taste.
All right. So, first things first. How do you taste good bread, and how do you differentiate between shit bread and good bread?
Trust your senses is the short answer. I brought 2 loaves tonight. I brought my iconic wheat sourdough bread because I think you should taste the original bread that we do at Poilâne. That's the big sourdough loaf. It's sliced, but you'll obviously have to share it. And the beauty of it is what you're going to do is you're going to break off a piece and therefore share bread with your neighbors. The word copain in French, etymologically, means someone with whom you share bread.
See, sorry. If you don't listen till the end, I get to keep it all. So, copain means sharing bread with.
Exactly.
Did you know that? No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Bullshit.
You can also just leave it in the bag and people just pass along the bag and you take a piece and share it.
How do we taste it? Is there a process to
So
it?
the way that you would taste it and what I would
Focus,
suggest
we're
you
talking
do,
about bread.
break off a piece and then open it in 2 with your hands and start smelling it. And see what it echoes to you. Is it sweet? Is it acidic? Is it pleasant? Or is it not a taste you like? And then start eating and just enjoying it. And chew it, because when we chew our bread, we're actually pre-digesting it. So that's the first thing. I also brought our rye and raisin bread. So this is a different grain. It's rye, and there are currants in it. So des raisins de Corinthe. And the reason why I brought this bread is because this is the bread that my father used to come and pick me up at school, putting 2 slices with a piece of butter in it and saying, that's your goûter, that's your little snack. And honestly, you have this mix between this slow sugars of the grains and this fast sugars of the raisins, and it's pretty incredible for that. So that's another piece.
And that's the one I keep for each and every one of you who left. So there's 1 loaf that's coming down that way. There's
This one-
1 loaf that starts here.
I'll just say that the rye and raisin bread...
That's not fair, because you tried to leave.
Sciences Po.